Hi, I'm Chris from Airwindows, and hey, you can do this. Because this is Airwindows kPlate240. So I felt like doing some cool things for the holidays, and it looks like we're going to be getting some plates. And yeah, let's see how that goes. 240 is an initial attempt, but it's not an initial plate because the plate that you're probably thinking of when you talk about like plate reverbs is actually a 140. 240 is the gold foil version. It's a much smaller plate, and it's not considered to be as like big and luscious and platey as you could say a real plate might be. But it's got its own thing going on. Let's have a listen to it real up close here. If we go with a full wet sound, you can hear that has a plate-ish sound going on. We do have things like our Derez control. As you know, Derez is the way to make a reverb algorithm operate at all sample rates, but also to be able to downsample it until it produces darker, lower pitched sounds. For instance, you end up getting a extremely rolled off sound because the sample rate of the reverb that's being used is actually quite low. We've de-rezzed it down. And one side effect of that is that this is also kind of multiplying the size of the room that you would be in, except for that it's a plate. So this might be a fun time to, let's go down to one of those really dark ones to play with Regen. Because here's the thing, the Regen on this is not the same as the Regen in a lot of my other reverbs, because this is meant to be a plate effect. So we've got a big long sustain, we've got our Derez being very low or insanely unreasonably low, so we've got a lot of sustain going on. Or we can swoop this Derez up but we never quite get the really huge deep reverb of an EMT 140 because this is the 240. This is a gold foil style. It's a lot smaller and it's not considered to be as good. But there's a special trick with my implementation of it. Yes, we can have this extended sustain to some extent anyhow, but when we start tightening it up, we're not just only shortening the sustain of the plate, we're moving a panel closer to the plate, and that affects the low frequencies. Listen to this. So it's like a new design of a plate sound. You can make it incredibly, incredibly tight here. And we can bring in the pre-delay, which we've got a little pre-delay, but this is still all wet. And this lets us fool around with a delay effect on the beginning of it. And since it's such a tight effect with Regen this small, you can get some really interesting things happening, because Airwindows kPlate240 has the capacity of really damping down the resonations of that plate. It's basically all the highs at this stage. And now that we've got it doing that, we'll keep replaying it. We can expand the regen back out again, and we're going to start getting a fuller sound again. But you'll hear that it's still doing that extreme suppression of lows, because you're moving sort of a virtual panel away from the resonating plate. Up to this stage. And yeah, there's always a certain amount of that effect. You can kind of hear it in the resonations and sort of platey splatter going on. Normally you will use slightly less overwhelming amounts of reverb. And there you have it. And again, you can use Derez to make it seem larger but also darker, like this. There you go, different sound. The reverb really dials in and tightens up when you have Regen become less, because of the feature I was telling you about, where it's simulating it's one of those weird plugins that I do like SubTight that is in the insides of this one making this happen. And there you go. So kPlate240, like all of my plugins, is free because I am Patreon supported. So if you have money to buy plugins, then by all means jump on my Patreon, if that's the sort of thing that you can tolerate doing. There are people who can't, that's fine. They will often ask me, can I just give you one-time money? Sometimes I say yes, and sometimes I say don't worry about it. Point being, here I am and I'm doing this stuff because I like making plugins for people, and I feel like people should have effects like this. Effects like a neat little, I was recently recording stuff off of some vinyl records, and I am studying sound as well as I can, going back to the original sources. Like me and Ben Jordan agree on one thing, which is nobody should be making new vinyl records. Although granted, the cover is the best place for artwork ever. Yeah, I get that. But still, we shouldn't be making new vinyl records. You can completely capture anything within a vinyl record in, say, 2496 FLAC. And old vinyl records are another story, and I like those a lot. And a recent find, which I am in the process of studying, have you ever listened to all of the songs off of Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five's The Message? I found that one, and of course I've listened to The Message, and it sounds very interesting, but I've also listened to all the other stuff off of that. dawn of rap right there. This is kind of before the time of, like, there's a band in there, there's like a bass player and so on. And it sounds like 70s soul. There's songs entirely inspired by Stevie Wonder on there. And they're amazing singers. And it's neat because this is all a world where rather than look to hip hop and rap as like destroy the sound as much as possible with like bad sampling or cool sounding but old sampling, some of this comes from that, soul/disco era where you wanted things to sound glossy and amazing. But when you couldn't afford to get a 140 plate reverb because they're big and expensive and you dedicate an entire room to it and it's enormous pain in the butt to set up, well, you could buy a 240 for much cheaper and it wasn't as good. But that is what makes that show up in smaller studios. So my hope is that this 240 plugin will find its uses. It is not maybe going to sound as amazing as your full-on 140 reverb, although I will note it sounds very different from kPlateA, B, C, and D, because that was largely chasing after the sound of a software product where I didn't appreciate what they were doing with their licensing terms at the time. And so I did my own thing, which was put out a product that is for free and compete. This doesn't go after that target. This goes after what I thought sounded like a cool sounding plate effect. And I hope it will come in handy. I will keep working on more stuff. Again, I am Patreon supported, so I get to put all of my time towards this. You might also notice I've been changing around the look of my video, and I was working on the sound of it because of somebody who had a criticism on the previous video. I might have forgotten to set a plugin. I use discontinuity for the sound of these, but I have to set it to like 72 dB, and I might have left it at 100, which is not the way to do like a small intimate vocal. But I've also done a secret trick, which I am not showing you right now, that is a physical object in the vicinity of the microphone for the purpose of giving another tonal character. And if it works, I will in fact tell you about it. But that'll have to be for next week. I'll get back to work and I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.